Bran's feet found the earth beneath him. He stood in the middle of a grassy clearing, lush and fully leaved trees lined where he stood. The mid-afternoon sun peeked through their branches, drenching his surroundings in gorgeous sunlight. He closed his eyes and tried to feel the warmth of the day on his face, the breeze on his skin. He took a deep breath in, but was forced to remember that he couldn't feel anything on his trips into the past. Not the sun, nor the air, nor the wind, nor the grass beneath his feet. He could merely observe, not feel. He turned his glance behind him and saw a great body of water peering through the trees, sunlight glistening invitingly off its surface. The God's Eye Lake. The Great Lake was known all over Westeros, not only because it was the largest in the land, but because of the mysterious island that lay in its center. The Isle of Faces, it was called, so named because it was full of weirwood trees with faces carved into them, an island supposedly inhabited by an ancient race of creatures called the Green Men. Bran recalled hearing tales of the Green Men from Old Nan. They were little men with antlers and skin as green as leaves, who rode elks and guarded the weirwood trees of the isle, she had said. She had also said no man was allowed to set foot on the Isle of Faces. 10,000 years ago, the first men crossed the Arm of Dawn from the east of the world, and there they found what men now called Westeros. In the west, they found dense woodlands, inhabited by strange little creatures that spoke with the animals and lived among the trees. The men called these creatures the Green Men and the Children of the Forest. Taking the land for themselves, the first men cut down the trees and drove the children out, putting them to the sword wherever they resisted. The children fought back with their magic and called upon all manner of creature to aid in the fight against the invaders. Direwolves, mammoths, and even giants took up the call. After hundreds of years of warring, the first men and the children reached an agreement of peaceful coexistence, a pact that was made at the Isle of Faces. They agreed the men would inhabit the open lands and the children the forests. The Green Men marked the end of the war by carving a face into every weirwood tree on the island. Legend had it that they guarded the island to this very day, and no man has been permitted to set foot on it ever since. A curious thought reached Bran. Leaf and the other children of the forest he had met had all been female. Perhaps the Green Men were the male counterparts of their race, he pondered. Bran forced his focus back to the time he was in, back to the sunlight and the breeze, and despite his inability to feel it, he knew it had been strangely warm that year. The year of the false spring, it had come to be known, when winter has suddenly departed and flowers and crops had started to bloom once more. The people of Westeros had rejoiced, believing plentiful harvests and warmer nights had come early, only for their hopes to be dashed when the harsh winds of winter returned the following year. Bran looked up above the trees. 5 towers stood menacingly in the distance against a bright blue sky, their black stones burnt and the remnants of each melted down each tower's sides. He knew he had come to the right place at the right time. The castle of Harrenhal, the Great Tourney of 281 AC, the tourney which had sparked Robert's rebellion. Bran needed to see it for himself. The events which had changed the course of history, the events which had led to the downfall of the Targaryens, and the events that had been the catalyst of Jon Snow's birth. Everyone knew the story. Rhaegar Targaryen had been the victor of the Great Tourney at Harrenhal. After the final joust, when he knocked Sir Barristan Selmy from his horse and won the day, instead of riding to his wife, Elia Martell, Rhaegar had ridden straight past her and laid a wreath of blue winter roses in Lyanna Stark's lap instead. He publicly shamed the mother of his children and declared his affection instead for the young she-wolf. After the tourney, Rhaegar had kidnapped Lyanna, and Robert Baratheon, Lyanna's betrothed, had raised half the country with Ned Stark against the Targaryens. Rhaegar and his father, the Mad King Aerys II, were killed, and Robert Baratheon seized the Iron Throne. Despite all of Robert's efforts, Lyanna died during the war and left the new king with a hole in his heart that could never be filled. That was a story every man, woman, and child in Westeros knew, but Bran had seen it was a lie. Rhaegar had not kidnapped Lyanna. They were in love, they had married in secret, and the product of their union was Jon Snow. Lyanna charged Ned with the protection of her son, both of his safety and his true identity. Robert's rebellion was based on a lie. Jon Snow was the proof. He was a product of a war that had ravaged the entire country. Bran shifted his attention back to the time he was in, back to the trees, the summer's day, and the looming towers of the great black castle of Harrenhal. He walked from the forest to the great structure, savouring the use of his legs, and soon found himself in Harrenhal's grounds. Tents of many colours stood between the black walls of the castle, bright banners of every house in Westeros cracking in the wind, a grand affair with many lords, ladies, and knights in attendance. Walking through the grounds, knowing already who had attended the tourney, Bran was none the less surprised when he felt a pang of emotion on seeing his father, the 18-year-old Ned Stark. Outside a dark-coloured tent, emblazoned with House Stark's direwolf sigil, Ned stood with his brothers Brandon and Benjen and his sister Lyanna. They were all so young, around the age Bran was now, and he felt a strange pain in his heart, knowing what fate had in store for each of them. Bran stood for a minute, drinking in the sight of his family before he pressed on, knowing the Starks were not the only ones worthy of seeing at the tourney. Aerys Targaryen II, the Mad King, Rhaegar and Daenerys' father, was also in attendance. The tourney was the first that he had been seen in public in many years, and the common folk were shocked at the old king's long matted hair, foot-long fingernails and gaunt appearance. His dashing son, the Dragon Prince Rhaegar, had attended with his wife Elia Martell and their 2 children. Robert Baratheon, the young Lord of Storm's End, was also in attendance. He was widely known as the one to be feared at the tourney, and it was also known he had eyes for no one but Bran's aunt Lyanna, to whom he was betrothed. Jaime Lannister also attended, and it was at the tourney the Mad King knighted the young lion as a sworn brother of the King's Guard. Tywin Lannister, Jaime's father and the hand of the king at the time, however, was nowhere to be seen. The small folk gossiped he and the King Aerys were not on good terms. Jaime's upcoming appointment to the King's Guard meant he would renounce all claim as Tywin's heir to Castle Rock, the Lannisters' ancestral home. Howland Reed was also at the tourney, and in that moment Bran thought it strange that he had never met Howland, as he was a man his father Ned had regarded as his closest friend, though he had known Howland's children well, Jojen and Mira, for without them he would never have found his way beyond the wall to the Three-Eyed Raven. A sharp twinge of guilt pierced Bran in that moment, recalling how Jojen had died for him outside the Great Weirwood Cave, and now Mira was without a brother. What of Howland, though? Bran thought. Is he still alive? Bran recalled the tale Mira had told him about the young Crannog man who had come to the tourney of Harrenhal alone, a Crannog man who, Bran now realized, was her father, Howland. Mira had called this particular tale the Night of the Laughing Tree. Bran could now see if all the stories he had heard as a boy were genuine or not. He could travel through times past and observe things as they truly happened, and for a brief moment his head swam with power. He returned his mind to the tourney, set on discovering the truth of the Night of the Laughing Tree. Bran found what he was looking for as he walked through the memories of the open grounds of Harrenhal. Beyond all the tents, adorned in the colours of their houses, house banners sailing from their posts in the breeze, Bran glimpsed a small-framed man walking across the grass, staring up at Harrenhal's humongous black towers with an awestruck expression on his face. Bran knew he was a Crannog man from his time spent with Howland's children. The Crannog men were reclusive people from the neck, who were small in stature, just like Mira and Jojen, but known to possess considerable magical prowess. Howland was no exception. He looked rather out of place with his meagre physique and haggard clothing, especially as he walked among the knights donned in impressive armor, and the lords and ladies in their elaborate and ostentatious outfits. Despite his marveled expression, Bran noted Howland looked as if he knew exactly what he was doing, as if he had a sense of purpose. His miniature build did not go unnoticed by all as he walked through the grounds. 3 knights' squires had glimpsed the little man and had subsequently set upon him. They taunted him and shouted jeers like, "Go home, little coward, and only the strong belong here." They hit him with sheathed swords and kicked him when he was down. It was all the Crannog man could do to cover his head as he was curled up on the grass, attempting to minimize the blows coming from all sides. Bran looked on at the sight of the bullying when a strong and unmistakably female voice called out behind them. He witnessed his aunt Lyanna dash to the furrow, a wooden sword clutched in her hand as she shouted at the squires to desist. They laughed and sneered at her. "What can a little girl like you do to us?" Lyanna responded with powerfully levelled blows across each of their heads with her tourney sword. She deftly parried all of their attacks and struck with more ferocity than they would have ever expected from a mere 15 years, or her gender. The squires scattered and Lyanna helped the young Howland to her tent, where she cleaned his wounds and introduced him to her brothers, Ned, Brandon, and Benjen. Bran skipped forward from day to night, when a feast was held where one and all at the tourney attended. He watched as the Stark brothers forcibly suggested Howland take back his honor by dueling the 3 squires. Howland protested he was a man of weak physical talent, and any duel in which he took part would only diminish his honor further. He said he prayed for justice, even though he knew it would not come, and Bran noticed Lyanna looking upon him with pity and sisterly-like affection. Their exchanges were interrupted by the hushing of the feast, as the Dragon Prince Rhaegar, accompanied by his harp, sang a song for the hall. His voice, his music, and his movements moved Lyanna to tears. Her younger brother Benjen teased her for crying, to which she responded by pouring a cup of wine on his head. That night Ned befriended Howland and offered him a space in their tent for the night. The next day a mysterious knight appeared on the lists halfway through the day's duels and jousts. The knight was small in stature, wore ill-fitted armor, hid his face, and donned a shield emblazoned with a laughing weirwood tree. Bran observed the knight standing shoulder to shoulder with the other warriors, a clear head shorter than any of them. He may have thought it was Howland, behind the ill-fitting armor, but the young Crannog man watched on from the crowd, seemingly no wiser than the rest of the audience as to who this odd new addition was. Despite his miniature frame, the mystery knight proved a fearsome warrior, and Bran watched as he broke his lance on 3 far larger riders than himself and won the day of jousts. For his prize, the knight demanded the unseated riders discipline their squires, who were, coincidentally, the very same that had assaulted Howland a day earlier. The knights obliged, and each castigated their squire, and so Howland's honour was restored, and all by this small, mysterious warrior. The mad King Aerys watched the crowd in their captivation at the Mystery Knights. On observing their smiles, laughter, and expressions of enthrall, he turned his attention to the small fighter, the laughing werewood tree donned on his shield. After stewing in his paranoia for an evening, King Aerys concluded the tree was laughing at him, and sent his men to find the mysterious knight the next day, when the warrior failed to reappear. He even sent his own son, Rhaegar Targaryen, but alas, the knight was never found. Rhaegar only discovered the warrior's shield hanging from a tree. The mysterious knight of the laughing tree had all but vanished. Bran had seen it unfold in front of him. Mira's tale was true, and no one had known the identity of the Mystery Knight. He stepped into the memory of the last day of the tournament, when Rhaegar Targaryen and Sir Barristan Selmy faced each other from opposite ends of the list field, ready for the final joust. Both men smiled at each other from 100 yards away as they lowered their visors. All in attendance watched with bated breath from the stands, for the winner of this joust meant the winner of the tourney. And when both men charged, Rhaegar broke his lance on Selmy's shoulder and unseated the White Knight. The crowd roared in delight, for the Dragon Prince was popular among highborn and small folk alike. But when Rhaegar rode straight past his wife and named Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty, the crowd fell deadly silent, and the palpable fury of Robert Baratheon could be felt. The air was thick with tension, shock, and murderous rage. Bran's consciousness flew to a memory he had seen of Lord Baelish speaking to his sister Sansa. Baelish had said, "How many tens of thousands had to die because Rhaegar chose your aunt?" The crippled Stark's musings were interrupted by the sound of a horn in the distance. He jolted out of his trance-like state, and his consciousness fell back into the present moment. He was sitting in his wheeled chair in Winterfell's Godswood. The cold chill of the northern air bittered his cheeks, but he was more than used to it by now, having spent what felt like years in the great northern cave, training under the three-eyed raven. A horn sounded again, and the faint rumblings of marching men vibrated through the ground. A shriek in the skies in the far distance echoed, and Bran knew exactly what the noise signaled. Jon Snow is back, and he's brought his Dragon Queen with him.